Hello! Welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children, the podcast where I share the recordings of these bedtime stories I've improvised for my children over the years. Today's recording is from July of 2008, and it's the third in a series of stories about the Recheetah sisters helping Flibbertigibbet rescue their friends from some frost fairies. As a listening note, this story has some fantasy conflict that may be a little tense for the youngest listeners. But my wonderful children certainly enjoyed it. I hope you do too. Rebecca, Recheetah, and Diana both reached down with trembling fingers and gently touched Elia, the stupendous woofle, on her back. Elia looked up at them and said, "Are you ready?" They looked at each other, nodded, and said, "Yes." "Okay," said Elia. The next moment, everything went black, and they both had a feeling, sort of like that feeling you get if you're walking down the steps, and you think you're on the last step, but you're not. There's actually one more step than you thought there was, and so you end up stepping forward on what you think is going to be flat floor, and you suddenly step down when you weren't expecting it. That's exactly what they felt like for a moment. And then they were standing just inside a snow cave, looking out on a vast, frosty plain of snow. And Elia looked up at them. She said, "We're here." "Is this the cave where they're being held captive?" said Rebecca Recheetah. "No," said Elia. "I thought I would give you a chance to see what Hoarfrost looks like first." The two girls shivered. They said, "Is it warmer inside the ice cave where they're being held?" "Warmer, yes," said Elia, "but more dangerous. There are penguins and goblins all over the place. We'll have to be very careful not to be caught." "Okay," said Rebecca Recheetah. "Well, here goes. We're ready now." They reached down and again touched Elia gently on her soft brown back. Again, everything went black for a second, and they had that brief sort of half-falling sensation, that lurch. And then they were crouching quietly behind an ice boulder at the edge of an enormous cave. Rebecca and Diana both peeked carefully around the boulder. They saw all the things that Winella had seen before. The penguins flying overhead, the goblins patrolling below, the cages hung from the ceiling, and the other cages along one wall filled with stupendous woofles. The large throne at one end with Queen Shiver written on it. "I don't know about this," said Rebecca. "How are we going to get everybody free?" "Well," said Elia, "if you can free the other stupendous woofles, I'm sure that we could help teleport out your other friends." "I don't know," said Rebecca. "I'm awfully fast, but I bet by the time I had 3 or 4 of those cages open, the frost fairies would all be there, and they'd zap me with their frost wands. I can dodge 1 or 2 frost wands, but all of them." "Well," said Diana, "maybe I could climb up to the ceiling and climb down the chains of the cages and get Flip-Flop, the Tickling Wolf, and Winella, and that fairy up there free. And then they could help us free the stupendous woofles." "I don't know," said Rebecca. "I'm sure you could get them free, but I'm also sure that the frost fairies would notice. No, we need to think of something else." While they were sitting there thinking, they heard a tremendous commotion at the on end of their cave, where the throne was, and then they heard the voice of the Queen. "I will have your attention, please." Her voice was magically amplified so that everyone in the whole cave could hear her. She said, "Who is it, my loyal subjects, who has brought the frost fairies to the pinnacle of our power again?" And all the frost fairies in the cave, well, most of them, shouted, "Queen Shiver! All hail Queen Shiver!" She said, "And who is it who sits upon the throne, ruling our armies? Who is it who has brought the stupendous woofles under our control?" And all the frost fairies again yelled, "Queen Shiver! All hail Queen Shiver!" "And who is it?" she yelled. "Who is it who will lead you soon against the Cat Kingdom and bring them at last under our rule? Queen Shiver! All hail Queen Shiver! Yes, she said, but there is one among you who has not hailed me, who wishes to take my place on this throne, who thinks himself worthy to rule. Boo! All the frost fairies, she said, and so he has claimed the right to duel me. So step forward, Jack Frost. I think that without your famed Everest, this will be brief. Rebecca, Recheetah, and Diana looked at each other. They had both heard of Jack Frost. They had heard of Winella's adventures and her great battles with him, and how he had troubled Fairyland for so long until Winella had cast him out. They knew that he was a wily opponent, but they also knew that he had lost much of his power when Winella had destroyed his famous wand, Everest. They peeked around the boulder, and they saw Jack Frost step into a circle of frost fairies around the throne. Queen Shiver stepped down from her throne. They both pointed their wands at themselves and were covered in their frost armor. And then they began to battle. The battle was so quick it was difficult to follow, as they dodged and shot bolts of ice magic at each other. It was over, as Queen Shiver had said, very quickly. Jack Frost was soon encased in a block of ice, and laying there, he was carried off by a number of other frost fairies. Rebecca Recheetah stood up. "What are you doing?" said Elia. "I have an idea," said Rebecca. She looked down at Elia. She said, "Don't get caught. Try to free the others. Diana and I are going to create a little distraction." She began to walk forward, with Diana, after a moment of hesitation, running forward and holding her sister's hand. Together, they began to walk directly towards the throne. It did not take long before a group of goblins noticed them and began to hurry towards them. But when the goblins were about 5 feet away, Rebecca Recheetah took a deep breath and yelled, "The Recheetah sisters are here to claim the right to duel Queen Shiver!" She yelled it just loud enough that her words reached Queen Shiver, who was just getting ready to sit back down on her throne. Queen Shiver stood back up, and seeing the girls approaching, yelled to the goblins, "Let them pass if they wish to challenge me." The two sisters looked at each other. They both looked a little worried, but Rebecca had a little smile on her face. She whispered to Diana, she said, "Don't worry, she doesn't know that we have powers too. We'll be able to beat her." Well, they entered the open circle in front of the throne. Queen Shiver stood up and she said, "Ah, it is Rebecca Recheetah and her sister Diana. I have heard of you from Jack Frost. Do you think, Rebecca Recheetah, that you are fast enough to beat me? Do you think you can climb and confuse me, Diana? I think this will be an even shorter duel than the one against poor Jack Frost." She was still in her frost armor. The girls looked at each other. They were a little worried. They had not expected Queen Shiver to know who they were or what they could do. Queen Shiver said, "Well, since there are 2 of you and only 1 of me, it's fair that I have a helper, is it not?" The girls said, "Well, Your Majesty, we will duel you however you like," said Rebecca Recheetah. "Fine," said Queen Shiver. She said, "I will call for Quicksilver." Immediately, a frost fairy came running out, and he was clearly the fastest frost fairy they had ever seen. "Wow," Diana whispered to Rebecca. "He looks like he's as fast as you, Rebecca Recheetah." Rebecca Recheetah frowned a little bit. She said, "I think she was expecting us. I hope Elia succeeds in freeing the rest of our friends." Well, Queen Shiver bowed to the girls, and she said, "Begin." She was clearly ready for Diana. Diana jumped straight up and grabbed onto some icicles in the ceiling and began to swing from one to another. But Queen Shiver began blasting the icicles with her ice wand and knocking them off the ceiling, so that Diana had to keep jumping in order to keep from getting caught in the ice blast.
Why can't she turn herself upside down and start walking along the ceiling?
That's what she's doing. She's running among the icicles in the ceiling, trying to be able to drop onto Queen Shiver. Recheetah found herself in the race of her life. She was running as fast as she could, but Quicksilver seemed to be ready for her. Every place she ran, he was there, only a moment later, trying to hit her with his ice wand. The girls realized that they were not going to win unless something changed. It was Diana who realized it. She looked down at the floor as she was running around an icicle to dodge an ice blast, and she saw that being upside down, the necklace that their daddy had given them was dangling from her neck and about to fall off. She quickly grabbed it with her hand as it started to fall, and she thought, Daddy said that we should use this. We would know when we really needed it. Well, if we ever needed help, now is that time. So she grabbed it in her hand and she yelled, Rebecca! And she held it out so Rebecca could see it. Rebecca looked up just as she dodged away from a tackle by Quicksilver. She saw what Diana had in her hand, grabbed her own necklace and yelled, Diana! And they both, for a moment, felt rather odd. And then suddenly, Rebecca found herself doing something she had never done before. She was in that particular moment getting ready to jump, bounce off a wall, and run the other way to get away from Quicksilver. But when she jumped, she found that she stuck. Quicksilver had not expected that, and he ran by right underneath her. Now she was behind him, and she quickly took advantage of it to grab him by his ice armor, and then she began to walk up the wall. He, with his feet off the ground, could not do a thing. Diana, meantime, had had a moment of real surprise when she suddenly found that her feet had come unstuck from the ceiling. She found herself falling, but she didn't fall very far because she was just over a giant ice boulder. She landed on the ice boulder, and Queen Shiver aimed a blast of ice from her ice wand at her. Diana started to run aside, and she suddenly found that she was running faster than she ever had before. She was running so fast that she was already halfway across the dueling field before Queen Shiver's blast had even hit the boulder. I'm fast, thought Diana. I'm a Recheetah. She quickly ran up behind Queen Shiver, grabbed her wand out of her hand, and neatly stuck it down the back of her own ice armor. Then she pressed the button on it, and Queen Shiver froze. Meanwhile, she looked up. Rebecca, who is now a Stickapod at the moment, had Quicksilver. She was dangling him over some icicles that came up from the floor, and she said, Do you give up? Yes, said Quicksilver. Good, said Rebecca, and then she walked down the wall and put him down. She looked at the assembled frost fairies. She says, We have won the duel. You will now release us. The frost fairies took a step forward. They did not look like they were going to admit that the girls had won the duel. They looked angry. But fortunately, at that moment, the girls saw something else behind all the assembled frost fairies. They saw dark black cats of Flibbertigibbet's special royal guard beginning to blink in behind the assembled frost fairies, while all of the frost fairies and all of the goblins and all of the sanguines had been entranced with the duel. Elia had successfully freed the Tickling Wolf, and Flip-Flop, and Ray, and Manella, and together they had quickly freed all of the stupendous Woofles. They had teleported back to Flibbertigibbet's palace, where his forces were waiting, and the stupendous Woofles were teleporting in Flibbertigibbet's troops as fast as they could, which was very fast indeed. Rebecca thought it only polite to warn the frost fairies. She said, Look, cats! A frost fairy in front pointed his wand at her and said, "Oh, don't think you can trick us that way, little girl." And Rebecca said, "Okay." A moment later, that particular frost fairy fell under the weight of an enormous tiger landing on his back. The tiger looked down at him and said, "She did warn you." The frost fairies turned and screamed in unison as they saw a wave of cats pouring over them. The frost fairies, no longer able to teleport because they no longer had the stupendous woofles, fled from the cave through all sorts of cracks and crevices, and the battle was over only moments after it began. Winella came to see Rebecca and Diana and said, "Thank you so much for freeing us. I don't know anyone else who could have done it." "Ah, indeed," said Flippertigibbet. "The cats owe you a great debt, sisters. You are the heroes of this, and I am much impressed to hear that you have defeated Queen Shiver. Where is she, by the way?" The girls looked around. Queen Shiver had somehow escaped, along with many of the other frost fairies. "Ah, well," said Flippertigibbet, "at least we are all free. I'm sure we will hear from Queen Shiver again, soon enough." Then Diana got out the phone that her daddy had given her. She opened it up, and as soon as she opened it up, her daddy's voice came out of it saying, "Hello?" "Yes, Daddy," said Diana. "We've done what we needed to do. We're ready to come home now." "Excellent," said their daddy. "Both of you just hold on to the phone for a second." They both reached out and held onto the phone, and were gone. They found themselves back in their very own kitchen, where their daddy had a nice bowl of hot chocolate waiting for each of them.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and witty commentary were supplied by my children. The music was created by Brandon Thompson. Your reviews and personal recommendations are the main way that new listeners find the show, so thank you for spreading the word. I'd love to hear your feedback, so feel free to get in touch via email or social media, which are listed in the show notes. Until next time, I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.